1993, all fast food giant, a symbol of American convenience, became the epicenter of a public health nightmare. The promise of a quick, satisfying meal turned into a devastating ordeal when hamburgers, tainted with a virulent strain of E. coli 0157H7, were served to unsuspecting families. The microscopic pathogen, invisible to the naked eye, unleashed a wave of suffering that would ripple across the nation. Over 700 people, many of them children, fell violently ill. Their bodies were racked with excruciating abdominal cramps and bloody diarrhea, symptoms of a bacterial invasion that, for some, would lead to kidney failure and lifelong health complications. 4 children died. The most chilling part of this tragedy wasn't just the outbreak itself, but the fact that it was preventable. Warnings had been sounded. Food safety advocates and scientists had previously raised alarms about the inadequacy of cooking temperatures for ground beef, highlighting the very risks that were about to become a horrifying reality. The system was aware of the danger, yet the wheels of corporate and regulatory change turned too slowly. Corrective action, when it finally came, was a reaction to a catastrophe that had already unfolded. A belated response written in the pain and loss of its victims. This was not an isolated accident. It was a systemic failure. This single, high-profile incident pulled back the curtain on a much larger, more pervasive truth. The food we consume every day, the sustenance we rely on for life itself, travels through a long, complex, and often vulnerable chain. From the farm to the processing plant, from the distributor to the grocery store shelf, from the restaurant kitchen to our dinner plate. There are countless points where safety can be compromised. Each year, the consequences of these failures are measured in staggering numbers. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 48 million people in the United States alone get sick from a foodborne illness annually. Globally, the World Health Organization reports that nearly 1 in 10 people fall ill after eating contaminated food, resulting in hundreds of thousands of deaths. Beyond the immense human cost lies a colossal financial burden. The global food industry, a multi-trillion-dollar behemoth, hemorrhages billions each year in the aftermath of these events. The expenses are relentless. Massive product recalls that strip shelves bare, crippling legal battles and settlements with victims, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a brand's shattered reputation. The trust of consumers, once lost, is incredibly difficult to win back. Yet, despite the clear and present danger to both public health and corporate bottom lines, the cycle continues. The headlines may change, the specific contaminants may differ, but the underlying story remains disturbingly familiar. We are forced to ask a difficult question. Have we truly learned the lessons from the past? Or are we simply waiting for the next disaster to strike? 13 years after the fast food E. coli crisis, the threat emerged from a seemingly innocuous source, the fresh produce aisle. In 2006, a bag of pre-packaged, ready-to-eat spinach became the vector for another deadly E. coli outbreak. The contamination spread with terrifying efficiency, reaching kitchens and restaurants across 26 different states. What was marketed as a healthy choice became a source of widespread sickness and fear. Hundreds of people became ill, suffering the same brutal symptoms that had marked the earlier hamburger outbreak. The nation watched as public health officials raced to trace the contamination back to its source, eventually pinpointing a single processing plant and the fields in California where the spinach was grown. The incident was a stark reminder that the danger wasn't confined to meat products. It could lurk in the very foods we turn to for health and wellness. The investigation uncovered a complex web of potential contamination points, from irrigation water exposed to wildlife feces to breakdowns in sanitation at the packaging facility. The recall was massive, forcing a nationwide removal of all fresh spinach from store shelves and restaurant menus. The economic fallout for spinach growers was catastrophic, but the greater impact was on the public psyche. A fundamental trust had been broken. If you couldn't trust a simple bag of spinach, what could you trust? The event exposed the vulnerabilities inherent in a centralized food system, where a single point of failure could have far-reaching and devastating consequences for an entire country. Just 2 years later, in 2008, a scandal of an entirely different magnitude erupted in China, revealing a level of corporate malfeasance that shocked the world. This time, the victims were the most vulnerable members of society: infants. The contaminant was not a bacterium, but an industrial chemical called melamine. It was intentionally and illegally added to milk and infant formula to artificially boost protein content readings during quality control tests. The chemical, which is used in the production of plastics and fertilizers, is toxic and can cause severe kidney damage and failure. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. An estimated 300,000 infants across China were sickened, with thousands hospitalized and at least 6 deaths reported. The crisis was compounded by a catastrophic failure of transparency. As China prepared to host a major international sporting event, a moment meant to showcase the nation's progress and openness, initial reports of sick infants were suppressed, whistleblowers were silenced, and parents' desperate pleas for information were ignored. The desire to project an image of stability and control took precedence over public health, allowing the tainted products to remain on the market for weeks longer than they should have. When the scandal finally broke through the wall of official silence, the public outrage was immense, both within China and internationally. It was a harrowing illustration of what can happen when corporate greed is enabled by a lack of regulatory oversight and a suppression of the truth. The crisis led to arrests, prison sentences, and a complete overhaul of China's food safety regulations. But for the families whose children were harmed, the damage was irreversible. Between 2015 and 2018, a popular and rapidly expanding restaurant chain, one that had built its brand on the promise of food with integrity, found itself at the center of a series of high-profile food safety crises. Over a span of 3 years, multiple distinct outbreaks of norovirus, salmonella, and E. coli were linked to its locations across the country. More than 1,100 customers, who had been drawn in by the company's marketing of fresh, high-quality ingredients, became sick. The incidents shattered the company's carefully crafted image, transforming it from a Wall Street darling to a case study in corporate crisis management. The company's response involved closing stores for nationwide food safety training, implementing new protocols, and launching extensive public relations campaigns to win back customers. But the legal and financial repercussions were significant. Federal prosecutors launched a criminal investigation, culminating in the company agreeing to pay a $25 million fine to resolve charges that it had adulterated food. While $25 million is a substantial figure, it must be viewed in the context of the company's immense scale. During that same period, its annual revenues often exceeded $7 billion. The fine, intended as a punitive measure, represented a fraction of 1% of its yearly income. This stark disparity highlights a deeply troubling economic reality at the heart of the food industry. For many large corporations, the potential financial penalty for a food safety failure, even one that sickens over 1,000 people, can be dwarfed by the day-to-day costs of implementing and maintaining the most rigorous, state-of-the-art prevention systems. The cost of upgrading equipment across thousands of locations, sourcing from only the most stringently vetted suppliers, and investing in advanced tracking and testing technologies can run into the hundreds of millions. When viewed through a cold, purely financial lens, a calculation can be made where absorbing the cost of an occasional outbreak, the fines, the settlements, the temporary dip in stock prices, considered a more economically viable cost of doing business than investing in the comprehensive fail-safe systems that would prevent it. This grim calculus places profit margins in direct conflict with public health, creating a persistent and dangerous vulnerability in the food we all eat. The patterns are undeniable, repeating across decades, continents, and different sectors of the food industry. From the factory farm to the fast food counter, the system is riddled with pressures that can compromise safety. The relentless drive for efficiency and lower costs, The complexities of global supply chains, and the vast gap between the scale of the industry and the resources of regulatory agencies all contribute to a state of perpetual risk. The stories of these outbreaks are not just historical footnotes. They are urgent warnings. They demonstrate that without constant vigilance, robust regulation, and a fundamental shift in corporate priorities, the past is destined to become our future. Improving our food safety systems is not merely a technical challenge. It is one of the most critical public health imperatives of our time. It requires a multifaceted approach, one that empowers regulators with more authority and resources, holds corporations truly accountable with penalties that outweigh the financial incentives for cutting corners, and leverages technology for better traceability from farm to fork. It also demands a culture change within the industry itself, moving from a reactive model of crisis management to a proactive culture of prevention, where the safety of the consumer is not just a marketing slogan, but the single most important metric of success. The health of millions of people and the integrity of the food on our tables depends on it. We must demand a system where safety is not a luxury, but a non-negotiable right.